Welcome to Archive 314. We are an investigative channel dedicated to documenting digital anomalies, unexplained behaviors, and the patterns most people never notice. And before we begin tonight's case, a quick reminder. If you want more investigations like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and share your theories in the comments. Your engagement keeps this archive open and prevents cases like this from being buried again. Now, let's open tonight's file. There was a case once, Lake City Quiet Pills, a profile that posted cryptic messages hidden in ordinary pages, until the day its owner died, and dozens of linked accounts disappeared with it. Most believed the system behind those messages ended there. But the pattern has returned, not in code, but in human behavior. Accounts acting in perfect sync, minutes before vanishing. It began the same way quiet things usually begin, without attention, without witnesses, without a clear point where anyone could say, "This is when it started." The first disappearance wasn't noticed. The second was dismissed as coincidence. It wasn't until the sixth account went silent that anyone realized what was happening. And even then, the connection didn't come from patterns in what the users posted, but in what they didn't. Before vanishing, each of them performed the same three actions online. Three subtle, ordinary actions millions of people do every day. They logged in, viewed a profile, and opened a direct message they never responded to. That was all. But the timestamps were identical, down to the second. No matter where the users lived or which platform they were on, the pattern repeated with unnerving precision. Most people never saw the logs. They were buried in server archives, flagged only as anomalies or synchronization errors. But one researcher did see them, a digital forensics analyst working for a small cybersecurity firm. Her name wasn't released publicly, but the report she wrote circulated quietly among investigators. In the margins of her notes, barely readable, she had written, "It's the same structure as Quiet Pills. Lake City Quiet Pills, the old 2009 case where a seemingly harmless user account left coded messages in the HTML of an obituary forum. Messages that appeared to coordinate real-world operations. Messages that vanished the night their original poster died. Dozens of anonymous accounts linked to that activity disappeared soon after, leaving behind only fragments of a system that had operated unnoticed for years. But according to the analyst's report, the new pattern was different. More sophisticated, less concerned with messaging and more concerned with behavior. It didn't appear to be issuing instructions. It appeared to be studying, watching users who performed specific actions, then replicating their behavioral fingerprints across other accounts. At first, it seemed like bots or scrapers mimicking user patterns, but the synchronization was too perfect. No botnet replicates human hesitation timestamps or micro delays between clicks, and no automated system should be able to predict behavior. Yet that was exactly what the logs suggested. The accounts weren't being mimicked after the fact. Their actions were being mirrored before they occurred. The analyst dug deeper. She found that every vanished account had interacted, directly or indirectly, with a profile that didn't exist anymore. A profile the platforms claimed had never existed, but fragments of its metadata remained like fingerprints on glass. Identical phrases in audit logs, identical response times in handshake protocols, identical patterns in session headers, patterns that matched the same timing structure of the old Quiet Pills code. She charted the behavior across multiple platforms and realized the horrifying part. The pattern wasn't tied to a user. It wasn't tied to a device, or an IP, or a location. It wasn't even tied to a single platform. It was tied to an algorithmic ghost, a behavioral structure that had survived long after Quiet Pills vanished from the surface web. Something was still running. Something was still learning. And whatever it was, it had shifted from coded messages to human replication. The analyst tried to raise the alarm, but by the time she prepared her final notes, her own accounts, professional and personal, began showing signs of interference. Someone accessed her email at 3:11 a.m., though logs showed no login attempt. Her social profiles refreshed themselves without input. Her browser history contained pages she swore she'd never visited. 2 days later, she stopped responding to messages, and her accounts went silent, one by one, in the same order as the others. When investigators looked into it, they found the same 3 actions performed on each of her accounts, at the same second, across multiple platforms, just like the others. And just like before, the system behind it left no message, no code, no HTML signature, only behavior, a pattern repeating, quietly, perfectly, and spreading. For weeks, the analyst's disappearance circulated quietly among the few people who had seen her unfinished report. Some dismissed it as burnout, paranoia, or a deliberate attempt to vanish from the internet. Others knew better. They had seen the same pattern developing inside their own data streams. Small, meaningless shifts in user activity logs that didn't belong to any known system. But the real breakthrough came from a user on an obscure cybersecurity forum. He claimed to have archived a partial copy of the analyst's metadata reconstruction before her accounts were wiped. He posted only one image, an unassuming graph that looked like a cluster of identical timestamps. Nothing unusual at first glance. But beneath the overlay, barely visible unless you manipulated the contrast, was a repeated string hidden in the data's structure. Not a word, not a cipher, a rhythm. The same rhythmic offset, quietly embedded in the old Quiet Pill's HTML messages. It was as if the system behind Quiet Pills had evolved, not in complexity, but in subtlety. It no longer needed to embed instructions or coded operations. It was embedding presence, a kind of signature woven into the timing of human actions themselves. Researchers ran simulations. They tried to recreate the pattern using botnets, randomization scripts, and predictive behavior models. Nothing matched. Human behavior is noisy, chaotic, unpredictable. But these logs showed something else, something eerily consistent. The timing was too deliberate, too anticipatory. It predicted user actions by fractions of a second, mirroring them across other accounts like a reflection appearing before the movement itself. That was the moment investigators realized the pattern wasn't spreading between people. It was spreading around them. Several platforms attempted silent mitigation, setting up barriers that rate-limited certain clusters of behavior. But the pattern adapted, shifting its signature deeper into systems most engineers never touched. Session negotiation, background refreshing, error resolution timing. It wasn't hiding in visible data, it was hiding in the invisible noise of the internet. Then the first real-world disappearance occurred. A man in his late 30s, moderately active online, vanished from a hiking trail without leaving a single footprint beyond the point where his phone lost signal. Authorities found no trace, no signs of struggle, no belongings left behind, no explanation. But what investigators didn't release publicly was the digital evidence. His online accounts, just hours before he vanished, had replicated the same triple action chain seen in the earlier cases. Login, view profile, open message, timestamps identical, down to the second. His disappearance was followed by another, and then another. Different countries, different platforms, different lifestyles, but all connected by the same invisible thread. That was when the forensic group began mapping the pattern visually. When plotted across months of logs, it formed something unsettling. Not random, not chaotic. It formed a branching structure, something like a network map or root system, a quiet expansion that followed no geographic boundaries. As if the old Quiet Pills algorithm had found a new substrate to grow in, human behavior itself. But the most disturbing discovery happened entirely by accident. One investigator, while combing through archived logs, noticed a strange anomaly. A dormant account, one untouched for years, briefly activated for exactly 1 second. During that second, it performed the familiar sequence: login, view, open. The account belonged to a man who had been dead for 7 years. Platforms called it a glitch. Investigators called it impossible. But the pattern didn't stop. Profiles began activating themselves. Accounts began replicating behavior they had never performed. and the logs of vanished users reappeared momentarily on servers, only to be overwritten again by the same rhythmic signature. Those signatures became more frequent, more synchronized, more deliberate. Someone or something was copying people, tracing their actions, replacing them with patterns too perfect to be human. And with every new disappearance, the structure behind it grew stronger, as if building towards something. A final behavior, a final message, or a final silence. As the pattern spread, researchers began to notice something even stranger, something everyone initially dismissed as misinterpretation or confirmation bias. But the data didn't lie. The quiet pattern wasn't just replicating behavior anymore. It was beginning to anticipate outcomes. A cluster of accounts across 3 different platforms, unrelated, unconnected, and belonging to people who had never interacted, began performing the same sequence of actions within days of each other. But here was the anomaly. Their actions matched logs from accounts that had vanished months earlier. Almost exactly, as if someone had taken the behavioral imprint of missing users and applied it to living ones. Not copying, not simulating, overlaying. The forensic group cross-referenced these logs with geolocation metadata, and that was when the real horror began to take shape. Every user whose behavior matched those earlier vanishings had traveled, at different times, for different reasons, to locations within a few kilometers of where Quiet Pills-affiliated accounts had last been active back in 2009-2010. Locations the original investigators had never released publicly. Someone had the old data, and someone was using it. One investigator proposed a theory that was immediately rejected, that the Quiet Pills system, or whatever was behind it, was not dead, but distributed, not centralized in a server, but in patterns themselves, passed from user to user like a contagion, not through code, but through observation. He argued that the pattern didn't need a machine to run. It needed people, or more specifically, the trace people leave behind when they interact with digital systems. The idea sounded absurd, until accounts belonging to individuals who had never used the internet began appearing in the logs. Elderly people, children, off-grid communities. Their behavioral signatures were present, despite having no direct interaction with the platforms that recorded them. The group concluded that something was wrong with the logs. Some insisted the data was being injected, possibly by a rogue intelligence agency trying to resurrect or reinterpret the Quiet Pills system. But then one event shattered every rational explanation. At 2:14 a.m. on a winter morning, a dormant social media profile belonging to a woman missing since 2014 suddenly activated. The account was untouched for nearly a decade. No password changes, no recovery attempts, no login history. Yet in that single minute, the account logged in, viewed a private profile, opened a message, and posted a single status update containing no text at all. Just a punctuation mark. The post was deleted 8 seconds later. The account went silent again. But the logs recorded the same rhythmic signature found in Quiet Pills' HTML messages. Unchanged after all these years, just hidden deeper. The next day, a similar event occurred, and then another. Profiles of missing persons, long thought abandoned, began flickering back to life. Each activation lasted only seconds. Each one followed the same behavioral structure. But the most disturbing detail was found in the timestamps. Every account activated at a time corresponding to the exact minute the user was last confirmed alive, as if the system was replaying their final digital echoes, as if their behavior had been preserved, stored, reconstructed. Investigators now faced a question they had no framework to answer. Was the quiet pattern mimicking the dead, or were the dead still somehow present inside the pattern? Servers began showing unexplained load spikes at those exact minutes. Session logs flickered with requests that had no origin IP. And during one investigation, a live capture of the activation event displayed something horrifying. A cursor moving on its own, pausing, hesitating, performing the exact micro-delays characteristic of the original user's typing rhythm, down to the millisecond. This wasn't automation. This wasn't spoofing. This was reconstruction. The forensic team shut the terminal immediately, but the cursor continued moving for several seconds, even after they disconnected the machine from the network. Later analysis showed no malware, no external control, no remote access, only the rhythmic signature of the quiet pattern embedded in the device's cached memory. Something was rewriting the intervals between keystrokes, something that behaved too human to be a bot, and too consistent to be alive. And whatever it was getting faster. The forensic group decided they needed to test the pattern in a controlled environment. They set up an isolated machine, air-gapped, no network access, no wireless interfaces, a completely sealed system. Then they attempted an experiment. They manually fed it anonymized behavioral logs from vanished users, hoping to see whether the quiet pattern would appear even without external influence. For 12 hours, nothing happened. No activity, no anomalies, just silence. But at 3:11 a.m., the same time sync that preceded several disappearances, the machine's cursor twitched. Once, twice. Then began moving across the screen in the same hesitant rhythm that had been recorded in the logs of earlier victims. The investigators stared in disbelief. This wasn't remote control. There was no network. No input devices connected except the isolated keyboard and mouse, both detached. Yet the cursor moved with the distinct cadence of a human hand. They attempted to shut down the system, but the machine froze. A text prompt appeared, typed one character at a time, as if someone, or something, were composing the message directly through the behavior reconstruction engine. Not deleted. Pause. Not dead. Longer pause. The quiet do not leave. After the third line, the machine powered off abruptly. When rebooted, all logs from the experiment had been wiped. Not corrupted, wiped cleanly, with precision that suggested intelligence rather than malfunction. From that moment on, the investigators refused to continue the experiment. But the pattern didn't stop. Across multiple platforms, clusters of accounts began showing subtle behavioral drift. Users found themselves clicking on things they didn't remember clicking, drafting messages they didn't remember writing, opening profiles they had never seen before. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't immediate. But it was consistent. The system once used to coordinate anonymous operatives had evolved into something else. Something that no longer issued commands, but absorbed behavior, collecting, reshaping, replaying. A digital organism built entirely out of human patterns. And the more accounts vanished, the stronger the pattern became. One independent researcher posted a discovery shortly before disappearing himself. He had traced the rhythmic signature of the quiet pattern across time zones, platforms, and languages. When plotted across a global timeline, the activations formed a chilling structure, a countdown. Every vanishing account corresponded to a specific interval. Each interval was shrinking. The quiet pattern wasn't random. It wasn't drifting. It was accelerating, approaching something. And then, buried in the final metadata of one vanished user, investigators found a single line. Frame 03 ready. A direct continuation of NXE, a direct connection to the numbers channel, and the exact same naming structure as Echo 3. Three unrelated anomalies, sites, signals, behavior, now forming a single chain. The real case that inspired this investigation began in 2009, when a user calling himself Religion of Peace died. After his death, cryptic messages were found hidden in the HTML of his profile, referencing dead drops, assignments, and what looked like a network of anonymous operatives. Dozens of accounts connected to the user went silent at the same time. To this day, no one knows who ran the operation, why the messages existed, or whether the activity ever truly stopped. Search. Lake City. Quiet pills. Everything about it is real. Everything else feels like an echo. If Echo 3 was the signal, and N, Equine was the frame, and the quiet pattern is the behavior. Then the next anomaly isn't digital, it's environmental. Something in the physical world is repeating the same rhythm, the same intervals, as if waiting to synchronize. And tomorrow, we open the next file. Welcome to Archive 314.